This is the Wet Lunch on the High Seas podcast, a discussion of history, business, and culture with a nautical twist with historian Stephen Ujifusa. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about the naval architect William Francis Gibbs, who I had written about starting in 2007. And he was the chief designer of the ocean liner, the SS United States, which was built in 1952. That was his masterpiece. But he had spent the previous 4 decades as a designer of ships such as the Liberty ship during World War I. He designed many pioneering work vessels during the Second World War. His firm of Gibbs and Cox designed well over half of all naval vessels built during the Second World War. He never had any formal training, however, as a naval architect. He had dropped out of Harvard in 1910 just for graduation, mainly because his family had run out of money. He grew up in Gilded Age Philadelphia to a very wealthy and very powerful father who was a self-made man who had made and lost several fortunes in industry and commerce. And William Francis Gibbs was basically put into a very tight straitjacket by his mother and father, who expected him to be a proper Philadelphian. They wanted him to be a lawyer. However, William Francis Gibbs saw his father get ruined, and they lost their mansion in Rittenhouse Square. They lost all social status. His father died bankrupt in 1922, and William Francis Gibbs realized that he would have to do things on his own. He eventually worked his way through Columbia Law School, but he had no interest in the law. He hated it. What he ended up doing was he apprenticed himself to a very prominent admiral named Admiral David W. Taylor, who pretty much taught him everything he needed to know about naval architecture. But Gibbs's real passion was organizing. He was a master organizer as much as he was a designer. And his dream was to build the finest, fastest, most beautiful ocean liner in the world. But it took 40 years for him to actually make that happen. There were a lot of obstacles, a lot of things that prevented him from doing so, but it wasn't until the late 1940s that he was given the chance to design a flagship for the United States lines that could also double as a troop transport. She was built to carry over 2,000 passengers and 1,000 crew in peacetime, but should war break out, she could be converted within 48 hours into a troop vessel able to carry 14,000 soldiers. Pretty remarkable, all in the space of 48 hours. And Gibbs put everything he could into this vessel. It was his masterpiece. And I was drawn to him because he was someone who was kind of a misfit. He was someone whose parents put very strict expectations on him, a lot of which were influenced by status of the time. And he realized by his 20s that what mattered in the end was not social status, was not what other people in Philadelphia thought of him, but what he created, what he did. The firm he built, Gibbs and Cox, was very much an extension of himself. He had an open door policy to his office. The door was always open, and he was someone who could have an employee walk in, he'd be on the phone, and he'd say, hold that thought, and then he'd switch right away to talking about what he needed to do with the employee. According to one letter I found in the firm's archives in Newport News, Virginia, one employee wrote that he was grateful that Gibbs and Cox was a firm that actually hired Jews, which in the 1940s and 1950s for a firm of this type was very unusual. What interested Gibbs was merit. The engineer who designed the propellers of the SS United States was a Jewish woman named Elaine Kaplan, and he fostered her talent. She was straight out of Hunter College, high school, and he had hired her as an engineer. He enjoyed hanging out with people such as the sculptress Malvina Hoffman, the actress Catherine Cornell, and Eli Wallach. He loved going to the symphony. He was a cultured humanitarian, someone who loved everything artistic. And he knew what it meant to will something out of nothing. As one of his employees said, William Francis Gibbs didn't design ships himself per se. He caused them to be designed. And here's my summation of William Francis Gibbs's creative ethos. The big ship, the SS United States, that Gibbs willed into existence was more than a sum of the lessons he had learned in a 40-year career, and definitely more than a mere machine. She was his masterpiece, a supreme expression of his artistic vision, a symbol of excellence for the world to see. The fastest, most beautiful ocean liner ever built had a soul, the soul of her creator and the nation whose name she bore. No other ocean liner, perhaps no other ship in history, was so bound up in the life of her designer. In life and business, Gibbs defied convention and thrived, deftly working conventional corridors of power to finance his dream. But for him, the deepest satisfactions in life lay in work and creation. And to live that life, he first had to recreate himself. From a shy young man who isolated himself in his college dorm room to a charismatic and self-assured leader of men, confident enough to win the long fight to build the big ship, a creation that reflected the United States in its post-war glory, flush with prosperity, military might, and industrial supremacy. This ship is the product of explosive power, American industry, Gibbs proudly said, adding that the workers who built her were trustees for the people of the United States. Gibbs saw his creative journey as something larger than himself. Humility and belief in divine guidance, belief in your fellow man, he once asserted late in life, and what they have done for you and the little part you can play yourself are characteristics that all of us can embrace and employ. But in a private moment, as the United States neared completion in 1952, William Francis Gibbs took a breather from his relentless inspection tours. He found a secluded area on a deck and lay down. Clouds drifted by and seagulls wheeled above him. The clatter and din of the shipyard filled his ears, and the spring sun bathed the length of his thin frame. He turned to a friend, an enormous grin on his face. "Boy," he shouted, "don't we have fun?" The spirit of William Francis Gibbs and the creative human spirit that made this ship possible, and all great human achievements possible, is something that I believe will long outlive the physical manifestations of them, such as the SS United States, whatever her fate may be. And I still find this, even 12 years after I'd written these words, inspiring and pushing me further to do more. This is historian Stephen Ujifusa, and this is the Wet Lunch on the High Seas podcast.